The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor as Marcus Williams watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. His poor ex-wife Amara, the woman he'd invited to humiliate at his wedding, stepped out of a pristine white Rolls-Royce Phantom, her 3 toddlers trailing behind her in designer clothes worth more than his monthly salary. The same woman who used to beg him for grocery money now wore a diamond necklace that caught the Lagos sunlight like trapped stars. His bride Kyoma gasped beside him, her own wedding dress suddenly looking cheap in comparison. If you think this story is already shocking, wait until you hear what Marcus did to deserve this moment of justice. Make sure you'll subscribe because this tale of revenge will leave you speechless. Marcus's hands trembled as he recognized the children, triplets he'd never known existed, each one bearing his unmistakable features. The wedding guests, Nigeria's elite who had come to celebrate his union with the governor's daughter, now whispered and pointed at the spectacle unfolding on the church steps. Amara walked with the confidence of a queen, her silk dress flowing like liquid gold, while photographers who'd been hired to capture his perfect day instead focused their lenses on a dramatic arrival. The same society women who used to sneer at Amara's worn-out clothes now stared in obvious envy at her transformation. "Impossible," Marcus whispered, his mind racing back to that terrible night 3 years ago when he'd thrown Amara out into the rain, telling her she was nothing but a burden who would never amount to anything. He'd been so certain she would crawl back begging, so sure that his calculated cruelty would teach her to appreciate what little he was willing to give. Instead, she disappeared without a trace, leaving only a note that said she would prove him wrong. Now, watching her approach with the grace of someone who commanded respect rather than beg for it, Marcus felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The crowd parted as Amara reached the church entrance, her triplets, 2 boys and a girl, walking beside her with the poise of children raised in luxury. She paused at the bottom of the steps, her eyes meeting Marcus's for the first time in 3 years, and the smile that spread across her face was both beautiful and terrifying. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "I received your wedding invitation. I hope you don't mind that I brought a few guests of my own." The photographer's camera clicked rapidly as Marcus realized with growing horror that the biggest day of his life was about to become his greatest nightmare. Don't you dare scroll away. This is just the beginning of the most satisfying revenge story you'll ever hear. And trust me, you need to see how Marcus's world completely falls apart in the next chapter. 3 years earlier, the rain had soaked through Amara's threadbare coat as she stood on the doorstep of what used to be her home, clutching her positive pregnancy test with shaking fingers. Marcus had just returned from another business trip with his secretary Kyoma, and the way they'd looked at each other told Amara everything she needed to know about their marriage. She'd waited until after dinner to share the news that should have been the happiest moment of their lives, but instead of joy, Marcus's face had twisted with disgust. "Another mouth to feed," he'd snarled, snatching the test from her hands. "As if you're not enough of a burden already." The memory of that night still burned as Amara remembered how Marcus had grabbed her arm, his grip leaving bruises that would take weeks to fade. "You think having my baby will trap me?" he'd shouted, while Kyoma watched from the kitchen doorway with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "You're nothing, Amara, a nobody from nowhere who got lucky when I married you out of pity." His words had cut deeper than any physical blow, especially when he'd thrown their wedding photo into the fireplace, watching their happy faces curl and blacken in the flames. The woman she'd been that night, broken, desperate, believing his lies about her worth, felt like a stranger now. But that broken woman had found strength in the most unexpected place. Hours after Marcus threw her out, Amara had collapsed on a park bench, certain she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. That's when her phone had rung with a call that would change everything. Her Uncle David calling from London with news that her grandfather, the man who disowned her mother for marrying beneath their class, had died and left her everything. "You're the sole heir to the Okafor textile empire," David had explained, his voice thick with emotion. £50 million, factories across 3 countries, and properties you've never even seen. He spent 20 years trying to find you, to make amends. Standing in Marcus's church today, watching his face drain of color as the reality of her transformation sank in, Amara felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with justice. The 3 beautiful children beside her, Marcus's children he'd never bothered to claim, represented not just his loss but her greatest victory. She'd built an empire while raising triplets, had turned her grandfather's guilt money into a business dynasty that employed thousands across West Africa. As Marcus stumbled down the church steps toward her, his bride forgotten and his wedding in ruins, Amara realized that revenge truly was a dish best served cold. You won't believe what Amara says to Marcus next, and wait until you hear about the business empire she built while raising his children. Keep watching because this confrontation is about to get even more intense. Those children. Marcus's voice cracked as he stared at the triplets, his face pale beneath his wedding makeup. The resemblance was undeniable. They had his strong jawline, his deep-set eyes, even the small scar above the left eyebrow that he'd inherited from his own father. Amara watched him piece together the timeline, so the exact moment he realized what his cruelty had cost him. You were pregnant when I... He couldn't finish the sentence, but the weight of his actions hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. When you threw me out like garbage. Amara's voice was silk-wrapped around steel. When you told me I was nothing. Yes, Marcus, I was carrying your children, 3 of them, while you were planning your future with her. She gestured toward Kyoma, who stood frozen in her wedding dress, her perfect day crumbling around her like a house of cards. The wedding guests had their phones out now, recording every word, every expression, turning what should have been a private family moment into a public execution. Social media would be buzzing within minutes. But Amara didn't care. She wanted the world to see who Marcus Williams really was. The eldest triplet, a boy named David after her great-uncle, stepped forward with the confidence of a child who'd never known poverty or shame. "Mama, is this our daddy?" he asked, his clear voice carrying across the churchyard. "The one you said might come back someday if he learned to be good." The innocent question hit Marcus like a physical blow, and Amara saw tears spring to his eyes as he knelt down to the child's level. But David stepped back, instinctively moving closer to the only parent he'd ever really known. "You look sad," the boy observed. "Mama says sad people need to say sorry before they can be happy again." As Marcus reached out with trembling hands toward children who looked at him like a stranger, Amara felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but a deep weariness. The man kneeling in his expensive tuxedo, his perfect wedding day in ruins, looked exactly like what he was, a hollow person who had thrown away everything that mattered for appearances and status. His bride Kyoma was already backing toward the church, clearly calculating how to escape this disaster with her reputation intact. But as Amara watched Marcus try desperately to connect with children who didn't know him, she realized her revenge was far from over. It was time to show him exactly how much his choices had cost him, and how much more he stood to lose. This is getting emotional, but wait until you see what Amara has planned next. You absolutely cannot miss how she's about to destroy everything Marcus thinks he knows about power and success. Inside the abandoned wedding reception, crystal chandeliers cast lonely shadows over untouched tables as guests fled the disaster one by one. Marcus sat alone at the head table, still in his tuxedo, staring at his phone screen filled with messages from business partners who'd seen the viral videos of his confrontation with Amara. His construction company stock had already dropped 12% since the footage hit social media, and his biggest client, the government contract Kyoma's father had secured for him, was now in jeopardy. The irony wasn't lost on him that his carefully planned marriage for money and connections was dissolving faster than sugar in rain. Kyoma's absence spoke louder than any argument could have. Her designer shoes lay abandoned by the church door where she kicked them off in her haste to escape. Her bouquet wilted on the altar like a funeral arrangement. Her father, the governor, had left with his security detail, but not before delivering a message that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Consider our business relationship terminated, and if you ever contact my daughter again, you'll discover just how far my influence reaches." The man who'd promised to make Marcus rich and powerful had become his greatest threat in the span of a single afternoon. But the real blow came when Marcus opened his laptop and saw the headlines already spreading across news websites. "Businessman abandons pregnant wife, loses children to mystery fortune." The story was writing itself. Social media influencers were already dissecting his character, and somehow every cruel thing he'd ever said or done seemed to be finding its way to reporters. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The children and I will be staying at the Continental Hotel. We need to discuss the future. Come along." Hey! The message was simple, but Marcus understood it was really a summons, not a request, but a command from someone who now held all the power. As Marcus drove through Lagos traffic toward his reckoning with Amara, He couldn't shake the image of his children's faces, or the way they'd looked at him like he was a stranger dangerous to their carefully protected world. 3 years ago, he'd thought he was discarding dead weight, cutting loose a woman who would only hold him back from achieving greatness. Instead, he'd thrown away his children, his chance at real love, and unknowingly handed his future to the very person he'd tried to destroy. The Continental Hotel loomed ahead, its golden lights promising either redemption or complete annihilation, and Marcus was terrified to discover which one Amara had planned. Your heart is probably racing right now, and it should be, because what happens in that hotel room will change everything. Don't stop watching now. We're just getting to the most shocking part. The presidential suite of the Continental Hotel felt like a courtroom where Marcus was both defendant and judge, facing a jury of his own abandoned children. Amara had changed from a dramatic church outfit into simple jeans and a silk blouse, but somehow she looked even more formidable. This was a woman who'd built an empire, not the performance artist who'd crashed his wedding. The triplets played quietly in the corner with toys that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment, their contentment in this luxury making it clear that poverty was something they'd never experienced. "They call me Mama and Daddy both," Amara said, pouring herself tea from a silver service that gleamed under the hotel's crystal lighting. "I never told them their father was dead. I just said he was lost and might find his way back someday if he wanted to badly enough." Her words were casual, but Marcus caught the steel beneath them. These children had everything: education, opportunity, security, everything he could have given them if he hadn't been blinded by his own selfishness. The girl, who looked exactly like his sister had at that age, looked up from a coloring book and smiled at him shyly, breaking his heart with simple kindness he didn't deserve. "I want to be part of their lives," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to try to be the father they deserve, to make up for the time I lost." But even as he spoke, he could see Amara calculating, weighing his words against his actions, his promises against his history. She pulled out a tablet and showed him photographs, birthday parties he'd missed, first steps he hadn't witnessed, Christmas mornings where 3 little faces had looked toward an empty chair that should have been his. "You want to be their father now?" she asked. "After I did the midnight feedings alone, the teething, the tantrums, the first words? After I built a fortune while changing diapers and running a business empire from a nursery?" The children had moved closer during their conversation, drawn by some invisible thread toward the man who shared their DNA but remained a stranger to their hearts. When the youngest boy climbed onto Marcus's lap without fear, trustingly settling against the chest of someone who'd never earned that trust, Marcus felt something inside him crack open. "What do you want from me, Amara?" he asked, his arms instinctively circling the child who felt like the missing piece of his soul. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp as she leaned forward, and Marcus realized with dawning horror that this wasn't forgiveness. This was negotiation, and he was about to discover the price of redemption. "You think you know what's coming next, but Amara's terms are going to blow your mind. Don't even think about clicking away, because the next chapter will reveal the most shocking proposal you've ever heard. You want to be their father." Amara's voice carried the weight of 3 years of sleepless nights and solo parenting. "Then prove it. Give up everything you valued more than us, your company, your reputation, your comfortable life, and come work for me." The proposal hit Marcus like ice water, and he watched his children play while processing the full magnitude of what she was offering. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but a chance to earn what he'd thrown away through servitude to the woman he'd once called worthless. The terms were brutal in their simplicity. Marcus would sell his construction company and use the proceeds to establish a trust fund for the children's education, while he himself would start over as a project manager in Amara's textile empire at a fraction of his current salary. "You'll work your way up based on merit alone," she explained, her fingers dancing over financial documents that outlined his complete professional humiliation. "No special treatment, no shortcuts, no leveraging our personal relationship for advancement. You'll be just another employee who happens to share DNA with the boss's children." The children laughed at something on their tablet, oblivious to the life-changing negotiations happening feet away. Marcus studied the contract Amara slid across the marble coffee table, each clause designed to strip away every advantage he'd ever possessed. He would have to move from his luxury apartment to modest housing, drive a practical car instead of his BMW, live on a middle-class salary while watching his ex-wife command boardrooms and make million-dollar decisions. The man who had once called her a burden would now depend entirely on her generosity for access to his own children. "And if I refuse?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "Then you continue being the successful stranger they'll hear about occasionally, while I continue being their whole world." As if sensing the gravity of the moment, 6-year-old David looked up from his toys and walked over to where Marcus sat today. "Are you going to stay with us?" the boy asked with a directness that only children possess. "Mama says family means not leaving even when things get hard." The innocent question pierced through Marcus's pride like nothing else could have, because it revealed a fundamental truth he'd spent years avoiding. He'd never learned what family actually meant. Looking into eyes that were mirrors of his own, Marcus realized that Amara wasn't just offering him a chance to know his children. She was offering him a chance to discover who he could become if he chose love over luxury, relationships over reputation. This decision will change everything, but wait until you hear what Marcus discovers about Amara's real motives. The next chapter reveals secrets that will turn this entire story upside down. Marcus signed the papers with a trembling hand, ink flowing like blood across documents that would reshape his entire existence. But as Amara collected the contracts with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach drop, a second set of documents partially hidden beneath the first, bearing the letterhead of Okafor Industries' legal department. His business rival Kenneth Okafor, the man who'd been systematically destroying Marcus's construction contract for the past year, wasn't just a competitor. The signature at the bottom revealed he was Amara's business partner, and possibly much more. "You've been planning this for 3 years," Marcus whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "Kenneth didn't just happen to start targeting my business. You've been orchestrating my downfall since the day I threw you out." Amara's smile confirmed his worst suspicions, and suddenly every lost contract, every cancelled project, every business setback of the past 18 months took on new meaning. She hadn't just built an empire. She'd used it as a weapon, systematically destroying his livelihood while he remained oblivious to the source of his troubles. The children continued playing, their laughter a jarring soundtrack to Marcus's crumbling understanding of reality. "Kenneth helped me understand how business really works in Lagos," Amara said, her voice carrying a coldness that made Marcus's skin crawl. "How the right word in the right ear could cause project to stall, permits to be delayed, investors to lose confidence. You taught me that I was nothing, Marcus, so I decided to prove just how much damage nothing could do when it set its mind to revenge." The photograph on the side table, Kenneth with his arm around Amara at some business function, told a story that made Marcus's blood run cold. As Amara walked to the window overlooking Lagos's skyline, her silhouette framed against the city she now partially owned, Marcus realized that his signature on those contracts hadn't been the end of his humiliation. It had been the beginning of something far worse. "The children adore Kenneth," she said without turning around. "They call him Uncle Ken, and has been a wonderful father figure while their real father was busy building a life that didn't include them." The casual cruelty of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow, because he understood now that this wasn't about redemption or second chances. This was about completing a destruction so total that he would lose everything, including the children he'd just discovered he desperately wanted to know. Your jaw should be on the floor right now, because what Amara reveals next about her true plan will leave you absolutely stunned. Don't you dare stop watching now. "Daddy Marcus is going to work with Mama now," little David announced to Kenneth Okafor as the man entered the hotel suite like he owned it, his embrace with Amara lasting just long enough to confirm Marcus's worst phase. The children ran to Kenneth with the easy affection reserved for family, their joy in his presence making Marcus feel like an intruder at his own reckoning. Kenneth's smile was triumphant as he studied the signed contracts, and Marcus realized with growing horror that he'd just voluntarily entered a prison designed by the two people who hated him most in the world. "You played this perfectly, darling," Kenneth murmured to Amara, his casual endearment hitting Marcus like a slap across the face. 3 years of planning, and he walked right into our trap. Now we own him completely, his business, his future, his access to his own children. The children were showing Kenneth their drawings, completely unaware that their innocent play was a backdrop for their father's complete destruction. Marcus watched his son, his own flesh and blood, climb onto another man's lap with trust and love that should have been his, and felt something inside him shatter beyond repair. Amara turned to Marcus with eyes that held no warmth, no forgiveness, no hope for redemption. "You think this was about giving you a second chance?" She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. This was about making you watch while another man raises your children, while you work like a servant in my empire, while you live with the knowledge that every day a comfort and security they enjoy came from the woman you called worthless. The contract in Marcus's hands felt like shackles now, binding him to a life where he would be close enough to his children to love them, but forever prevented from truly being their father. As Kenneth swept the children up for promised ice cream, their laughter echoing through the suite as they left with a man they truly considered family, Marcus stood alone with Amara in the wreckage of what he thought was his redemption. "You wanted me to be nothing," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every cruel word he'd ever spoken to her. "So now you'll spend the rest of your life as nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder to my children about what happens when you choose pride over love." The door closed behind Kenneth and the children, leaving Marcus to face the truth that his story of revenge and consequences was just beginning, and this time he was the one who would learn what it meant to be truly powerless. If this story gave you chills, wait until you see what we have coming next. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because these stories of justice and revenge will keep you on the edge of your seat. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when karma comes calling.